I mean, if it's not dry, then it's like extremely wet. Like it's like after I just put in like a cup of water in there.
Okay, we're live.
uh, hello. Don't mind me. We were just talking
Hello.
about plants and stuff like that. All right. Hey everyone. I want to first off say welcome to the first episode. Oh, sorry about that. I want to welcome everyone to the first episode of the Black Podcast, where we have candid conversations with people in the Black community. Um, and I'm your co-host Garrett. Oh, wait, let me change my name. Bree. You want to say
Hi,
hi?
I'm Sabrina, and I'm super excited to be here with all of you to talk to Timothy. Timothy, can you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
I am Timothy.
Great.
Yeah, I'm Timothy Bart Levins. I am a gay Black designer from the South. I lead product teams currently at Facebook. I speak a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and whiteness and white supremacy, and also what else do I do? I'm a co-founder of an organization called And Design, which is a fellowship program, amongst other things. It's really around creating access for Black, Latinx, and Indigenous creatives across the U.S. And yeah, that's pieces of me. I'm sure there's other things.
There's a lot of things.
Nice.
I actually met Tim about 2 years ago, right? Yeah, about 2 years ago in Chicago at a Design Plus Diversity conference, which is really dope.
Mm.
Which you helped host, right? Yeah. So Bree, do you want to get us started? Actually, okay. Well, yeah, okay, all right, sorry. So, we're here to talk about whiteness in digital products, right? Which is
Right.
stemmed from actually your article on navigating whiteness that you posted to both Medium and Facebook design blog. And one thing that I just want to start off the conversation with is what was your motivation to create this article? Like, where did you come from? I'm sure that you've probably had these thoughts for a while, but what was the deciding factor for you to actually go forth and write the article and actually publish it? And also, why Facebook?
Um, why I published it through Facebook?
Uh, why you wanted to publish it, and then why also through Facebook? Because you could have just stuck
Uh,
to Medium.
I mean, well, there's pieces. I think the long story short is I was asked to speak speak at this event for SVA, the School of Visual Arts, and I completely forgot that I was supposed to speak until like the last minute, and so I was like, cool. So I'm gonna just try to throw something together. I've had a lot of thoughts in my brain. I'm just gonna like do something different. Like I'm not gonna do a deck. I'm going to just write some thoughts out, and I just want to deliver it like a Southern pastor, like just pure oration. And so, basically, that this article is the summation of maybe between 3 to 5 hours total of me just like throwing mine to paper to like just get something out for a couple of talks. And then after that, I went back and refined it a bit more, broke it out into two pieces. And the reason why I even wrote it was, or I did it through Facebook design, was really because one, I'd already been doing the work internally around a bunch of this stuff. So it's not like I was saying anything new or different or contrary to what I do. And also it's because there was another person, another design leader who was writing an article, and he admitted that it was trash. And I kind of handed him his ass a little bit on it, which it was all in love. Another fellow Black design leader, it was all in love, but also it was just like a recognition that it may not have been the right moment or voice. And so they asked me, "Is there something you'd like to write about?" I was like, "Well, there's this thing that I threw together, and I do want to expand on it." And so I also had New Year's resolution of like, I need to write more because my background is actually more so in writing than anything. So yeah, I basically went through the work of breaking it out, getting my ideas down, realized that it wasn't one part, but two. And then that 2-part turned into 3 parts. And so part 2 is currently going through the channels with editors and stuff. And then part 3, I'm going to focus on working on it at some point in life, hopefully over the next month or 2. So yeah, that's my long-winded short answer.
3 parts. Wow. I thought this was ending at only 2 parts, but okay. I'm really excited. Wow.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah, I read your article, Timothy, and I was looking all over for part 2. Like I started searching you on Google. I was like part 2, and then I couldn't find anything. So I'm excited that eventually, pretty soon, I'll be able to read the next part. And so talking about your article, can you tell us a little bit more about whiteness and what you think that is? Like, how would you define whiteness?
Whiteness is everything. In the sense that whiteness is both an experience, it's a system, socio-political, socioeconomic, all those things. Like, it is the thing in which we navigate through, and really a lot of especially non-white folks have to push against a lot. And so whiteness is power. Like if you think about it like this, there are ways that you can think about it that make it seem they're really palpable, and there are other ways where it's like nuanced and is very hard to see. And so when I say this is to say, like, our society is built up by white men in power, and it has been the continuation of like, how do we ensure that those folks stay in power? And then on the other side is like us saying, like, how do we actually pull away power and actually create space for our own and make things more equitable, whatever the case may be. And so it's not really a concept. It's just like, it's our everyday life. It's just how we navigate spaces. It's a very vague answer, but purposefully so.
Got you. Okay, and so you talked about how whiteness is a construct. It's pretty much everywhere. And as a product designer, how do you think that whiteness is designed? Like, how do people actively design for whiteness? Like, what are some ways in which people construct that system, pretty much?
Well, I mean, I think the better question is probably like, where are ways in which it doesn't show up. So if you think about it like this, when we think about how do we build products, generally speaking, we have a majority in mind of who we're creating for. And so like when people say, this is, race agnostic, whatever the case may be, is actually perpetuating whiteness, because whiteness says like everyone is like, it's sort of like this thing, like everyone is the same, there's no differences, which is part of the problem. Because on the flip side is like this level of individualism that comes with white supremacy. And so I think the thing to understand is every system we navigate was created for a specific reason, right? So I think the example I use in part 2 of my article I'll use here is like, how do you think about whiteness as a system? And then how do you apply that to, let's say, product development, product design, tech, whatever the case may be. So I use the example of Cash App. Cash App is what is the purpose of Cash App? It's to send, receive, and store money ultimately, right? And there's like nothing wrong with that, patently wrong or right. Like they have a really great mission around helping people get more access to funds in that kind of way, which is very altruistic. And if you think about like, well, why does Cash App exist? Well, it is that send, receive money, but like who's actually using it? Most people who are using it are the unbanked or underbanked. And underbanked means that you live in a neighborhood where you don't have access to banks to be able to like have a bank account, and unbanked means you don't have a bank account at all. And so when you think about this, you say, well, why wouldn't a neighborhood, for example, not have a bank? Most likely it's going to be a Black neighborhood or a lower income neighborhood that has overwhelmingly more people of color in it than anything else, because there's like markers of dangerous or unsafe when it comes to these neighborhoods. And so why would you put a bank there? Like, of course, right? It's unsafe. We don't want to put a bank there and you get robbed or whatever the case may be. So you then have people who are a subset of America, but there are like 60 million people who are unbanked or underbanked. That's like, I forget, that's like 16% of our US population. who are majority Black, Latinx, and Indigenous folks. And you say, okay, well, they're using Cash App because they need something that doesn't exist for them. Like, why are they unbanked? Is because of the high fees, because of overdraft fees, because they have been blackballed from banks, because they can't fill in, they can't maintain the level of money in their account to be able to maintain an open account, things like that. And so you see all these barriers that show up within the financial system, which still connects to Cash App. But then you go back and you say, well, why don't people, let's say, for example, why don't they trust banks? Because there are a lot of people who are unbanked, and it's because they lack trust in it. And then we can zoom back, go all the way back to the 1870s, and understand that Freedmen's Bank is a bank that was created for previously enslaved Black folks so that they can actually build economic wealth. And the government set this bank up for them. But then the First National Bank, which is also a governmental bank centered around white folks and whiteness, they started taking out these risky loans on railroads and real estate, and they put all the risk onto Freedmen's Bank. And so even W.E. Du Bois actually came and became president of that bank to try to save it, but ultimately they had to shut it down, which means that there were 66,000 people who lost, like I think it's upwards of 6 million or so, some exorbitant amount, millions of dollars in funds. And so like it completely tarnished the Black population when it came to economic prosperity because of this whiteness that overwhelmingly put all the risk on this Black bank, which ultimately hurt us in a space that was for us. And so there's a level of mistrust when it comes to banks that has historically followed us as a people all the way up to the point where we have to use Cash App because we lack the trust, because the socio-political system also lacks the, or has this level of whiteness or white supremacy that says that Black neighborhoods are dangerous, so we can't put banks there, which means that people don't have access to this type of economic funds that they need. And if they do have access to it, many times they're blocked from it because of things like redlining and all these other issues. So like, that is just like one system that is in the background of Cash App. And this is something we have to think through, is like, while you can't, like, the Cash App itself is like a patch for a bigger systemic problem we need to solve for. But ultimately, it doesn't make the app itself bad. It just says like, hey, we're building this without really taking into context all the historical issues that have impacted the community, which has forced them to have to use this. Because the flip side is also having access to money. Well, the world is going more digital when it comes to currency, like not only from a perspective of like a credit card, but now you have Bitcoin and like all these cryptocurrencies, right? Who won't have access to that to be able to like have the economic prosperity? Most likely Black and brown people. And then you think about the fact that if, especially homeless people, they rely on cash to be able to pay for things like food or other things. And so if we no longer have digital currency, then how are we helping the homeless? Like small businesses, especially Black and brown businesses, are many times are cash only. So now you're taking away digital currency, then, oh, well, Cash App is owned by Square. Square is now giving small businesses things so they can have access to digital currency. But if it wasn't for these different products, then they would be left in the dust, because we're only thinking about whiteness and white folks, and they're like, prosperity, move forward, progress is better. Damned if whoever's going to be hurt in the background because of this progress forward. So again, long answer, extremely complex subject.
Yeah, no, that was a lot of facts. Wow, just I know that you told me the Square before, but every time you say it, that whole story and example is just incredible. How much, like, I guess it's safe to say that just about everyone experiences whiteness in some form or fashion with, modern technology. And staying on the topic of, these big corporations and how they are basically creating these systems for themselves. In your article, you talked about the Twitter example. And for those who don't, so for those who don't know about the Twitter example, whenever you post a photo on Twitter, the algorithms will try to crop the photo in favor of non-melanated people. And there was like this one big controversial thing was, especially if the photo is larger than the viewport of the photo that Twitter has, then the algorithm will only try and find like a white person's skin, and it'll only focus on that. And there's this really long photo of some white guy, I'm not sure who he is, and then Obama. And then there's two photos where Obama's on the top, and there's another photo where he's on the bottom, and it's only showing the white guy in both photos. And when I saw that, I was like, I'm trying to really like wrap my head around it. Like, how is that possible? And there's literally nothing that you can say as an organization saying that there is no bias in your technology. And the whole point of this is digital products, where it's not just in product design, but is it safe to say that whiteness is also in technology as a whole,
Yeah.
where it's not just in design, but within engineering?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think so. And usually when people hear whiteness, they think like white people, but it is really referencing back to a construct that others the non-majority. And so I think back to HoloLens when I was at Microsoft. I remember them having to go through or navigate a situation where they had a certain interaction that happened when a person jumped, and then they had to realize, oh shoot, not everybody can jump. So then what do you do if you're a person who's overweight, or you're a person who like only has one leg, or you're a person who is in a wheelchair, you're quadriplegic or whatever the case may be, but you like all of a sudden you have no access to this product or to this experience because they weren't thinking about those individuals when they made the interaction in the beginning. That's just like one piece of it. And then you think about like Twitter is one example, but then you think about Zoom and its backgrounds and people with darker skin. You think about how you like, I'm not sure how many people have had to fight to be able to wash their hands when they have like the no touch. Like I actually have that problem every time, and I'm not that dark when it comes to like dark skinned folks. Like I'm pretty like I'm like brown, you know, like I'm not that dark. And so like for me not to be that dark, but I still have to like go from one sink to another to find the one that will recognize my skin enough to know that there's more than a shadow there for me to be able to wash my hands and dry my hands is ridiculous, but that's something we have to navigate. And so then you say, what is that message to like darker skinned people? It's like, oh, well, this isn't for you. This tech isn't for you. These things aren't for you. And so in the Twitter scenario, like they had a communications person to come out and say like, yeah, we assessed for bias and we didn't find any. It's like, oh, that's great, but most likely your engineering team is full of white folks who also didn't think to say like, how would this affect someone who's of darker skin? And they did a bunch of tests and show like, oh, well, it prioritizes darker skin when you do it this way, but it took them like changing contrast ratios and things like that. And so it's like the easiest fix, instead of trying to find all the ways where it's not the rule that it prioritizes white faces over black, is to say, maybe we should just pick the center of the photo, and that's what we're always going to do. Instead of trying to find what humans exist, just pick the center of the photo. So that means that the center of the photo is a white blank space, then it's a white blank space. And it's up to the person who's posting to ensure they have the right thing. But us trying to be smart to, make technology more engaging, whatever the case may be, it just emphasizes biases that people didn't think about because they don't have the people on the team to think about, oh, how could this go wrong? If we think about contrast ratios and how dark-skinned people will have a different contrast ratio against, so let's say, a white background than a white person, and how that could potentially affect how they're centered in the image, which ultimately says how the technology is centering or not centering them.
So do you believe that it's a representation problem?
I mean, it's a everything problem. Like, I think you can have 50 million black people on a team, but that doesn't mean that they're effectively understand their own, if not other, marginalized experiences to be able to like say, oh, we haven't forgotten about this. I think that representation is a huge piece of it. I think that when you don't have anybody in the room who is different, especially from a racial perspective, and we sort of like lean on the heels of, oh, well, there's cognitive diversity. It's like bullshit. There's cognitive diversity, which is an intersection of racial diversity, of gender diversity, of all these other things. But we don't think about intersectionalities either. But like the problem is like, you can get those people to be representative, but then how do you ensure they're not tokenized? Or how do you ensure that, when you have more representation in these spaces, that those people actually listen to? Because just because you have black folks or whatever on the team doesn't mean they actually are being listened to. Doesn't mean that people are actually respecting them when they say, hey, here's a problem we need to fix, or here's the danger of this. So like representation is only one piece of it. Like there's a level of humility that needs to happen. Like, I'm sorry, many times engineers especially, they just want to build something cool just to like have that clout. Like, look at the shit I built, right? And it's like, oh, great, you built something, but now how much harm has that caused other people? because you didn't think about your work just as effectively as a PM and as a designer has to as well. Same with folks in data science and data engineering. How are you surfacing up this data to show it to folks for us to be able to articulate what's the impact on certain communities, to understand what is disproportionately affecting one group versus another? And so like representation is a piece, but is also a part of the craft that's the problem that needs to be solved as well.
Okay, that was a lot of information, and thank you so much. I've been just so focused on what you're saying. So from what I'm gathering, it's all a construct, and in that case, then we probably want to make sure that we're teaching people from the onset of, you know, childhood or high school education, college education, how to identify these patterns and how to think differently. What are some ways you feel that we could educate the younger generation to not be a part of this problem, pretty much? Like the people
Honestly,
who are being trained as designers. Yeah.
Honestly, I think that I have less, and this is going to sound real, I have less concern with the younger generation than I do with like everyone who is age 24 and up right now. I think are actually where the bigger problem is. And it's because those folks are either one, already in the workforce, coming into the workforce, and what they're doing is they're being guided by, or they're sort of looking at certain examples of folks who have already been in power and saying, okay, I need to model myself after that because clearly that's the form of success. And then the people who are higher up, they're like, oh, this is important, but they sort of like pass it down to another group. And they can many times subtract themselves from the conversation as if they're not a part of it. And they do this as a defense mechanism to say, well, yes, we understand and agree that inequities exist, but I worked hard to get here, so I'm not a part of the problem, as opposed to you may have worked hard to get here, but your privilege and everything that came with it also made sure that you maintained this space, that you maintain this power, so on and so forth. So yes, we do need to need to teach younger generations how to like identify these different, like, I'm gonna say identify whiteness. We need to teach younger generations how to step out of this focus of individualism, like it's about me, and understand what is the community and what's like the most hurt in the community, and how do we work like focus on them. So like in product development, it's focused on the most marginalized of the marginalized, and that's where you start as a beginning versus the majority. Like it's sort of that 80-20 rule where we always try to create for the 80 as opposed to the 20, and really we should be focused on the 20, lowest common denominator, that like will be hurt the most if we get this wrong. And so like, I don't know, like I think there's a lot there. Ultimately, like it's the folks who are in place now that have the biggest challenge to like, they're the ones who need to like fix it and do it well, because then the folks who are younger generations who come in, they're learning from the folks who are in power, versus the other side of like people are coming in trying to make change, but because they're not in power, then they either one have to shift how they do things so that they can like even survive or like thrive, or two, they have to like go and create their own thing, which is not a problem. But many times you're coming against behemoths. Like, yes, there should probably be someone who tries to create a better version of Facebook. Will it actually happen in the near future? Probably not, because where you're going to find a platform is going to be able to beat out almost 3 billion people across the world, right? So like we have to do the internal work with the people who are in power now to make sure that they're on the right track, so that when we bring in interns and, you know, low-level folks, they come in with this understanding that this construct exists and how they navigate it and how they should be thinking through these things. So by the time they're in power, then we have already gotten them like helping mentor and train the next set of folks below them. So yeah, I think it's less about the younger generation. They're not the problem. It's the people who are in power now.
That makes sense. So to follow up on that, we have a question from Ben. Hey, Ben, I'm glad that you can join us. He asked, the fact that these products are being developed after using testing, would that suggest that participants are not diverse enough?
Well, you have to think that like user research, there's a couple of flaws in it. One is just generally from like, what are the participants that you're bringing forward? But then there's also the question of just generally how, once you've done this research, let's say, for example, you've done a ton of research, you got the most diverse set of people to come in. In fact, let's say you focus just like nothing but Black folks in America. And like that was your core focus, and you want to really learn from this group of people. That's great. But if you spent an hour, even 2 hours with this people, and you go back into a room and then synthesize their thoughts, and then you say, okay, this is obviously what we need to do, and then we go and do that thing, but you actually never went back to double check that, is this synthesis actually accurate? Like, is this the experiences that you said that you had, that we actually reflect your thoughts, your experiences effectively in a way that actually meets what you were saying? And then are we solving for that problem versus like, sometimes research is done to validate that we're doing the thing that we're trying to do right. And it's not about who are we going to harm. It's like, oh, did we do the right thing? Like, is this button going to work? Or does this like user flow actually work the way we think it will? Like, it's about validation, not about like actually how do we reduce harm and make this an equitable experience. So I think, yes, user research is great, and having diverse participants is great, and it's a part of it. But it only goes so far if how we're validating the work we're doing is not back with that same community, and is just being synthesized and then bastardized internally to be whatever narrative we need it to fit to keep moving forward and feeling good about the work we're doing.
That's very great. That is very great. So Bree, I don't know if you had a question to ask. If not, no. I wanted to sort of get into a little bit of Timothy's life. I know that is one of the sections in your article, and you talk about a lot of different parts of your life where whiteness has affected you, both personally and within your career. So I guess my question is, how can you like identify whiteness? Because I know that certain times, like, again, I didn't know about whiteness until you first told me what it was. And so I guess like for those who aren't aware, or this is their first time hearing about it, how can they sort of navigate it themselves in their own lives and be able to identify and handle it appropriately?
I mean, how you handle it is always going to be a personal challenge, but I'll say like two things. One is to understand that whiteness can be internalized and propagated and expressed by non-white folks. So like, for example, let's say a lighter skinned Black woman saying something against a darker skinned Black woman. That is a representation of whiteness, right? Or straight hair versus kinky hair is whiteness, right? Like, oh, why do you talk that way? Well, what way am I supposed to talk? Like, is there like African-American vernacular English is actually an important linguistic anomaly that like should be respected, not eradicated. But like you say, oh, like ebonics and things like that. That's like whiteness is like, oh, when I'm in this professional setting, I'm supposed to talk a specific kind of way. Whiteness is every time we code switch, because we've internalized whiteness to the point where we're like, oh, well, the only way for me to be seen or be respected, the only way this looks professional is if I sound like, James from, Chicago or whatever, like whatever the case may be. Like I have to, talk like this person. This is also the opposite of like us asking Black people, why you talk like a white person? It's this thing of like, basically it's the expectation that everyone should operate or act as though as you are. And it's like, that means that the specific way to do things, right? So there's a specific way in which you're supposed to speak or act. There's a specific way that like an example that I use is or like when I think about my childhood is like, I used to get in trouble all the time in math class because I didn't use the same formula as my teacher did, the same answer, because I was using a way that made sense to me. Right?
Always.
and like, to like whiteness is like, that's a precept of white supremacy. So it's like, oh, well, this is how it's written, so it's like, well, is the goal to get to the right answer, or is the goal to just copy what you're doing? And many times in instruction is to copy what you're doing, not to get to the right answer. And so like there's it can be so broad that it's really hard to pay attention to it. But many times it shows up in work of like these little dog whistles, like for example, like for me, I had to leverage being gay as a way to keep me from being seen as dangerous as a black, especially because I had white women as leaders. And so like I was in a space where I knew that I couldn't be angry. I couldn't be upset. I couldn't like show any level of emotion outside of joy, because anything outside of that was seen as scary, fearful, whatever the case may be. And so I had to navigate a space where being authentically me and being able to have a full range of emotions like every other white person around me was able to have was acceptable. And so I was held to a different standard because of whiteness and how people thought that I should look or operate. Like what going to work and wearing a uniform is whiteness. It's like, oh, everyone, this is what professional looks like in a tie and whatever the case may be. And I tell people nowadays, like if I go for an interview, I'm not wearing no damn suit and tie. I'm wearing a sweatshirt and some jeans and some hella expensive shoes, and that's what I got on. There's someone who reached out to me on LinkedIn recently who invited me to come and like basically rent an office space downtown Seattle. And so I went to the website and they had a dress code. It's like, you know, smart casual, no hats, which usually like no hats is no hats. It's like they do things around like saying no black things, so no athletic wear, so on and so forth. And I responded back to being interested in renting a place here or being associated with this company that elevates white supremacy in a way that in which they tell people how to dress. I actually was talking to someone who worked for GM as a design leader. She's from Brazil, and interesting because she was promoted into a role that she never asked for. And in doing so, her white leader basically told her like, yeah, we need to make sure that you look more professional. So they literally paid for her to go out and like they paid to buy her wigs to cover her natural hair. They paid to get her a makeover, to give her makeup and to buy her new. And it's like, you only are allowed to wear gray, blue, or black. And like all these things. And she said, experience, she literally sat in her car and cried because like for some people be like, oh, this is to get a free makeover from a company. Oh, that's amazing. But when it's done in a way to cover up your blackness, and for her Afro-Latina social identity, like that was something that completely tarnished how she even saw corporate America. Like after that, she left the US to go, and that's where she is now. These things that we navigate all the time, like usually I tell folks is like not something you figure it out over time. Like as these happen, like when you're in college and a professor in a certain way, and you're like, did he just say what I think they said? Or like you're in school and they say, well, you know, of course you can't do this. Try this other thing. Thing is most likely as it relates to sports or something non-academic. So it's almost like they're trying to shy you away from the things that may be too hard for you. Like whiteness comes in so many ways and it's traumatic for us. And start to understand those micro and macro traumas that you've had over your lives, that this system is all connected to how people perceive as black folks and how it ties to whiteness and how you have to navigate it all the time.
Every time is just a wealth of knowledge. Okay, that was great. That was great. So I know that we have a couple of questions. So Daryl asks, this is in response to what you said earlier, are there any companies that you've been noticing taking a step to eradicate the whiteness in their digital products?
No. I mean, I think some people are trying. Some people it's performative, it's real. Because I am in Facebook, I know that there's a lot of things that are real, and we have some real people. Know that that won't go so far, and that we have a lot more work to do to make sure that it lands effectively in product. I think that like I use Twitter as an example in my first article, but what I will say is like they started working on a bunch of community-based work, and like because they're creating communities on Twitter, which to me is hilarious in Facebook, and so it's like, oh, this looks kind of familiar. But that being said, like they actually have been taking the steps to have these live sessions with people on the platform. I think part of it is sort of like in support of, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like part of it is, I think, is purely marketing, because get people to be interested in the products you're building, you like create forums for them to hear about it. And then they're also using their was it their like voice, I guess I forgot the name of that feature, but their voice feature they have now. And so I think
Spaces.
Yeah, Spaces. Yeah, so they're using Spaces now as a mechanism for this. So it's like promotion of the product, but also what they're doing is like co-creation and hearing from the community about what they want. And co-creation, I think, is one step towards like dismantling whiteness in product development, because it takes away from this thought that like so innovation itself is a product of white supremacy. If you think about it like this, concepts of white supremacy are individualism. We have to be the best. We have to be the first to market. First to market is very much it's about expediency, like try to go fast, go as fast as possible above all else. And then of course, like with innovation is the progress is bigger and better. So basically saying that it doesn't matter one or if we've forgotten anyone, like what matters is that we actually are building this thing. And so like usually you see the last one show up when it's like people do something terrible, an app does something terrible, the case may be, and then you see this apology that comes out that says, oh, it wasn't our intent to do this, the impact is what matters. And so like I think innovation is a big issue, because what it does is it forces to think that they need to create in silos and ignore a swap of people to have the big reveal. Apple is like terrible about it. And the real power of innovation is when you actually like bring people into the fold, when you actually create it as a community, you actually meet versus like saying you're meeting people's needs, but really you're just taking an anecdote from a couple of folks within user research.
I'm sure that answers Daryl's question for sure. But going into like this is that's actually a good segue. So Ben has a question, being the designer himself. What are some practical things that he can do as a designer, or maybe in the process, to bring more equity to solving problems?
Yeah, this is what all like part 2 is about actually. So in part 2, I talk about systems and I talk about frameworks, and there are frameworks that exist. Like there's, Antoinette Carroll's ECCD, or Equity Centered Community Design Framework. There's the Liberal Design Framework that was just released a couple of weeks ago. There's like equity pauses and that whole thing that's a thing as well. It's like there's a ton of frameworks. You literally can just Google equity design and they'll all come up. But I think the big thing that has to be addressed is sensibility, like understanding like what are all of the like one, you assess products to see if they're equitable or inequitable. You don't have a checklist. That doesn't exist. It shouldn't exist. In fact, checklists shouldn't exist for accessibility. And that's one of the biggest problems, is that people have relegated a bunch of this work to be checklists or things I just need to go through. And what we're doing is we're over-indexing on sense of comfort. Sense of comfort, also a precept. It's like, what is actually the work to be done and how do we actually dig into it? And so that means that what you have to do is you have a multi-dimensional approach to how you think about your work all the time. Like literally go through it, ask some questions. What does particularly harm someone? And how do we think, who have we forgotten? Like all those questions you should be asking yourself, but really comes into like, does it talk about humility? And like we talk about in design empathy all the time, but we never really talk about humility. The difference between those two is like empathy is like, oh, I feel what you're saying, or I feel for you. And you might feel for someone, but that doesn't mean you actually have like gotten yourself out of the way, because it's I feel for you, right? Being myself out of it and really creating space for you to talk and for you to be able to let me know what your experiences are, and then we understand you. So it's an act of listening and really absorbing, even when you're uncomfortable, versus the act of like centering self as, oh, I feel your pain, which is normally what we do. So like there's a ton of sensibility work that we have to do. We have to look at ourselves and say, where and how have we internalized whiteness, especially in engineering, because we know that is one of the most white male dominated spaces, and people who are Black in those spaces, especially like sometimes are operate in a specific way based on what they've seen around them. I've also seen there's actually a Black engineer at Google right now who's pretty well known. And I think one of my biggest problems with him is that he speaks from a place of ignorance. And so he thinks he knows about diversity because he's Black, but that doesn't actually qualify you to talk about diversity, equity, or inclusion. Like you have to do your work and your homework just like everyone else. The other thing is understanding how to be trauma informed, not trauma driven. So just because you experienced a trauma doesn't mean you have to like rush and do that thing and try to fix it, alleviate that thing, because really what you're doing is selfishly trying to alleviate your own trauma versus being trauma informed is like, I too have this experience and I understand how I've navigated. And so because of that, I'm going to open myself and make sure that I'm informed by it, but also going to be like have enough humility to then connect with others who may have the same or different experiences to understand to ensure I have a full understanding of the space that I'm in. So all I to say is like, it's internal work. Like you gotta check yourself constantly. And if you don't know how to check yourself, there's a ton of different ways out there for you to figure out ways to be able to do it.
Wow. Great. So I know that you mentioned that's what you sort of speak about in part 2. So I'm curious if we could get a sneak peek into what
Nope.
part 2. For real?
Nope.
No sneak peek?
Not a word.
Is there like an ETA on it?
Actually, I don't even know. I'm trying to I'll put it like this. I finished my draft for the most part. I'm just waiting for editors, comms people, legal, all of them have to like skim through it and feel good about it. So right now it's going through all the processes. But like, everything I said is basically a sneak peek. So You're welcome.
Much appreciated.
Timothy, I just loved everything you said, especially about the humility aspect. So it seems like it's this work that you're doing. It's really, so tell me if I'm wrong, because the way I'm understanding it is the work that you're doing is really teaching people how to be humble enough to realize that, one, they don't have all the answers, and that, two, they're designing for other people. Like they're not designing for themselves to say that they designed this or I did this or we did this, but we're doing it for you. And I really love that because it captures the essence of product design and technology and all the things we're doing. Like we're serving others through our work. And I like that you brought that up. And so,
yeah,
yeah.
I would actually push that a little farther though, because I think that, traditional design has been, we're designing for others, but in reality, we've been designing for ourselves, right? Like, and again, it's not just design. I say we've been building for others because I think that just as guilty as we are as designers, product managers and program managers are guilty for pushing the strategy. Data scientists are guilty for pulling the data, and engineers are guilty for building it out. And everyone's guilty for not being able to be expansive about how they're thinking about things. So this isn't like, I think it's bigger than design. It's like, as we build products, policies, social, economic, political, it is like we all have a part to play in it because everything is designed. Engineering is designed with code, right? You're still creating and building and solving problems, but in a different way. But I think the big thing is like, it's not really even creating for. The thing we should be like striving for is creating with. Co-creation is the true dismantling of white supremacy. Like creating for gives us this safe feel good that we're creating. Like, oh, like I work at this company and we create these things for marginalized people. It's like, oh yes, I can feel good about this. I feel.
Hello?
Have we validated what they even else? So like, I mean, I think there's none there to have to think through, but like ultimately our goal is creation with, not creation for.
Thank you. I absolutely love that. Co-creation, creating with. So it's not about us. It's not about what we're doing to other people. It's about working with them. I absolutely love that. I have a friend who's a product. Well, she's trying to be a product designer. She's learning how to be a product designer, and she always talks to me. So we have these tech conversations, and she was teaching me a little bit about what she was learning, and she said that empathizing is the first step in the product design process. But it seems like people. It seems to me that people are trying to empathize from their own perspective. They're trying to feel good about the work that they're doing. They're not really thinking about co-creation or anything like that. So I absolutely just love that point. I'm learning a lot from this talk for sure.
This is again where whiteness is power. We as product developers, right? Whether you're engineer, designer, whatever, as product developers have power that no one has. And with that power, when we center ourselves, then we perpetuate white supremacy, right? And so like this individualism in the midst of power. And so like I say this also keenly knowing that I work at Facebook where we don't have a co-creation process yet. Like we've talked about it. We've talked about the need to create more of one. We have put things in place to start to do that. We may not be for quite some time. And so like I'm fully aware of like this place that payments while also having this mindset, but also that internally I can leverage my power to push how we do things. But all of us have power to do this stuff. And so when we do like, this is where it goes into sort of the ethics of design, but really it's like ethics of technology. And this is really hitting on part 3 of what I've been writing, is around like, we as product developers are nudging people. Nudging is actually a concept from behavioral public policy. Says like, all right, can you get a population to take an action and do the thing you want them to do? We as product developers are master manipulators. Our job is to manipulate societies, communities, wherever the case may be, for better or worse. We do. And so when you think about it from that perspective and you say that we're going to create this thing and it might completely change how humans engage with each other, then we have to understand and take on the impact of that work that we're about to do, for good or bad. And then it's like, okay, cool. So we can't just empathize with folks because that's, again, centering ourselves. We need to be where it's like, okay, what is the impact and what would that be here? And how do we make sure, work with people, whatever the case may be, to either mitigate that impact if it's negative, increase that impact if it's positive, the wealth, increase access, whatever the case may be. And so, I think it's all this to say, like, we are beholden to a lot, and we have a lot of decisions that we can make, and we have the power to shift. And until people understand that they have like the power that we hold, then it's gonna be really hard for any change to be made. Like if people are going, like, it doesn't matter if you're the lowest of the low person at a company, like let's say the most junior person at a company, you still have, or no one else around you has, or no one else outside of that company has, you don't have access to the resources and the impact that you do by making one small decision or helping drive.
That's fair. I know you have to go soon. And I just have one last question to sort of wrap it up. So I'm sure that you spoke about it earlier, but can we combat whiteness? Is there like a concrete way to combat it?
And actually, I'd like to add something to the question. Can we combat whiteness, or do we need to always navigate it essentially and just lessen its impact?
I think it's all of the above. 'Cause I see, like, I don't know if it's combat. I'm not sure if combating is the right word to, like, I think dismantle is probably the better word, because it's a system. It's not something it's something you can fight against, yes, but it actually has to change. And so that means that you have to really dismantle or recreate whatever that word is, like systems. And so I think you can't combat whiteness like you combat like COVID, right? Like I think it's different. Like the CDC just said, one of the biggest health crises right now is racism, which is a really interesting perspective to take, because truly it does hurt people, both from a psychological, physical, emotional space. Like it actually like screws with you, like it's added stress. But is where you're in spaces, how do you acknowledge that it exists? It doesn't have to be like, hey, you in the meeting is like, hey, this is whiteness. It's more so like, are we doing the right thing? Do we have mistakes here? Like things tools you can leverage to to understand, identify, and address. I think that then from there, it's the question of what do you do with it? Like, is it just simply speaking up? Is it, if you have the power, being the one to create the new system? Is it the one to the system and then share that with someone else? Like, whatever that action is, but it's not really like an either or thing, which either or, this concept of white supremacy, it's not really either or thing. Is like more of all of the above. Like, some systems can be dismantled really effectively and it's more equitable. Other systems are really tough, and so you may have to figure out like how you redirect the system and create some positive out of it, because it's too ingrained in one way. Both, I think, internal and external agitators to be able to drive it. So just as willing to be internally to be able to drive change, others who are external who are also pushing to drive change.
Wow.
Thank you.
That was great. Tim, I want to say thank you so much for your time, wisdom, knowledge, all of this. This has been great for the past 50 minutes, just spitting out gems. For everyone, if you guys want to read or haven't read his article yet, Navigating Whiteness Part 1, the link is in the chat. And Tim, do you mind if I drop your portfolio bio link in the chat? No, I'm assuming no. We're just gonna say we're gonna drop it.
Yeah, I don't have.
You're like going in and out, Tim. Oh, Tim, that Facebook Wi-Fi is not working. Yes. Yeah, you might need to talk to Mark about that. Okay. Wait, let's give him a second, see if he can reconnect.
Thank you.
Tim, you're coming back.
Tim.
I wish I had like a theme song to play right now. That would just be perfect.
Yeah.
Hello, are you here? We can hear you. Maybe, Tim.
Hello.
Shit. Testing 1, 2, 3.
And he is not here, and he's back.
That didn't work. Okay. Well, we're gonna. Oh wait, there he is. He joined. Hold on.
From my computer from my phone because my computer is doing something weird.
Yeah. Not surprised. But yeah. Thanks a lot, Tim. Any last words that you would like to say?
It's isn't Zuck's fault for my internet is Wave broadband, which has been a shit show here in Seattle. Last thing I got to say. Because I can hear you, I can see me on. So I heard your voice, so you know.
Oh, really?
So what the audience doesn't know is I give Garrett shit all the time because he deserves it. Like raggedy dog in the back and them 2 bean bags, but we ain't about that.
Okay, thank you guys so much for joining our podcast. Thank you, Timothy. You will be throwing shade after we stop the slide in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah. Talk to y'all later.